They told me I wasn't invited to my own wedding. Let that sink in for a moment. Not that it was cancelled, not that it was postponed, but that the event, the celebration of my supposed union with the man I loved, would be proceeding as planned, just without me. They said it was a family affair. And in that single brutal moment, they made it crystal clear that I was not, and would never be, family. If a story like this resonates with that feeling of being pushed out, of being told you're not enough, then you're in the right place. Stick with me, and maybe even hit that subscribe button, because this isn't just a story about pain. It's a story about what happens when you take that pain and forge it into a weapon. This is the story of how I took back my name, my dignity, and my wedding day. Part 1. The Gilded Cage. It all started, as these things so often do, with love. A simple, blinding, all-consuming love for a man named Liam Preston. When I met Liam, it was like the world shifted from monochrome to technicolor. He was charming, intelligent, and had a laugh that could chase away the deepest shadows. He worked in finance, a world of sharp suits and sharper numbers, while I was a floral designer, a world of soil-stained hands and fleeting beauty. We were different, yes, but in the beginning that was our strength. He said I was his anchor to the real world. I thought he was my window to a world I'd only ever read about. Our first year together was a whirlwind of stolen weekends, late-night conversations whispered over cheap wine, and the blissful ignorance of two people building a world just for them. The name Preston didn't mean much to me then. It was just his last name. I had no idea it was a brand, a dynasty built on old money and even older expectations. I didn't understand that to be a Preston wasn't just to have a name, but to uphold an image. An image I was never meant to fit. The first time I met his parents, Eleanor and Richard Preston, was the first time I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. They lived in a house that wasn't a home. It was a statement. A sprawling stone manor on the outskirts of the city, with manicured lawns so perfect they looked like CGI and windows that stared out like cold, judgmental eyes. The air inside was still and smelled faintly of lemon polish and disappointment. Eleanor was a woman carved from ice, elegant and severe, with diamonds at her ears that seemed to catch the light and fracture it into 1,000 tiny daggers. Richard was quieter, a man who commanded a room not with volume, but with the sheer weight of his silent disapproval. "Claire," Eleanor said, her voice thin and crisp as a winter leaf. She didn't offer a hand, just a slight nod that made me feel like a delivery person. "Liam has told us so much about you." The way she said "so much" implied he had confessed to a series of unfortunate mistakes. I smiled, a genuine warm smile that felt instantly out of place in that refrigerated room. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you both. Liam speaks so highly of you." Richard grunted from behind a leather-bound book. "He's a good boy. Loyal." The subtext was deafening. Loyal to us. The evening was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as polite dinner conversation. They asked about my family, not with curiosity, but with the detached air of genealogists tracing a problematic bloodline. My father was a mechanic, my mother a librarian. I said it with pride. The look that passed between Eleanor and Richard was infinitesimally small, but I saw it. It was a flicker of confirmation, as if they'd placed a bet on my lowly origins and had just won. "A florist, you said?" Eleanor mused, swirling a blood-red wine in a glass that probably cost more than my rent. "How creative. Is there much of a future in that? In flowers?" "It's my passion," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. "I own my own shop. It's doing very well." "A little shop," she repeated, the word little dripping with condescension. "Charming." Liam, bless his heart, was oblivious. Or maybe he chose to be. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, whispering, "They're loving you," completely misreading the glacial atmosphere. He was so desperate for their approval, so conditioned to their brand of affection, that he couldn't see the daggers they aimed at me over his head. For months, I endured it. Every dinner was an interrogation. Every family gathering was a performance where I was the only one without a script. They'd make comments about my clothes, always a little too loud for a whisper. They'd forget to include me in conversations, turning their bodies to form a tight, impenetrable circle. They were experts in the art of making a person feel invisible. I'd cry on the way home, the frustration and hurt bubbling up. Liam would hold me, stroking my hair, and offer the same useless platitudes. "They're just from a different generation, Claire. That's just their way. They'll come around, I promise." I wanted to believe him. I loved him so much that I was willing to absorb the 1,000 tiny cuts they inflicted, hoping that one day they'd run out of venom. I thought my love for their son would be the bridge that connected our worlds. What a fool I was. The proposal happened on our 2nd anniversary. It was perfect. Just the two of us, on a bluff overlooking the ocean, the salt spray on our faces. Liam got down on one knee, and the ring was stunning, a simple, elegant piece he designed himself, inspired by a wildflower I loved. In that moment, the Prestons and their cold mansion ceased to exist. It was just us. My answer was an immediate, tearful yes. But the moment we told his parents, the chill returned, more biting than ever. There was no celebration, no champagne. Eleanor simply examined the ring, her painted lips pursed in a thin line. "It's unique," she said, which in her language was a mortal insult. Richard clapped Liam on the shoulder, a stiff, perfunctory gesture. "Well, son, you've made your choice." He looked at me as he said it, and his eyes were like chips of granite. And then, the takeover began. "Of course, the wedding will be at the Greystone Ballroom," Eleanor announced a week later over the phone. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decree. "We have a standing reservation for family events." I had pictured a small wedding, something outdoors, surrounded by the flowers I loved. I tried to voice this. "Oh, well, Liam and I were actually thinking of something a bit more intimate, maybe a garden venue." A dry, humorless laugh crackled down the line. "Claire, dear, a Preston wedding is not a garden party. It is a major social event. There are hundreds of people we are obligated to invite. Business associates, family friends. You wouldn't understand." My blood ran cold. "You wouldn't understand." It was her favorite refrain, the invisible wall she built between us brick by brick. From that day on, I was systematically erased from the planning of my own wedding. Eleanor hired her wedding planner, a severe woman named Beatrice who looked at me with the same thinly veiled disdain as her employer. They chose the caterer, the band, the color scheme, a sterile palette of cream and gold that screamed wealth but had zero warmth. Every time I tried to offer an opinion, I was met with a patronizing smile. "Oh, that's a sweet idea, dear, but it's not quite the tone we're aiming for." My ideas were quaint, charming, sweet, adjectives used to dismiss a child, not a bride. Liam, my champion, my partner, was useless. He was caught in the gravitational pull of his parents, a force he had never learned to escape. "It's easier to just let them handle it, babe," he'd say, trying to avoid a conflict. "You know how Mom gets. This is her Super Bowl. It makes her happy." "But what about what makes me happy, Liam?" I'd ask, my voice trembling with a frustration that was starting to curdle into resentment. "This is our wedding. Ours." He'd sigh, that weary sigh of a man torn between two worlds. "It's just one day, Claire. Let's just get through it. Then it'll be just you and me. I promise." But the day was growing into a monster, a gilded, joyless spectacle that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the Preston family brand. I felt like a prop, a placeholder bride they had to tolerate to get the son and heir married off. The injustice of it was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest day and night. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every cutting remark, every dismissive gesture. My joy had been stolen, replaced by a constant, humming anxiety. The invitations were the final, gilded nail in the coffin of my dreams. They were thick, opulent cardstock, embossed with a golden P. My name was there, a footnote beneath Liam's. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Preston request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Liam Preston, to Claire Miller. Their son. My parents weren't even mentioned. It was as if I were being spontaneously generated at the altar, a bride with no history, no family, no identity beyond the one they were allowing me to borrow for the day. When I confronted Eleanor about it, her eyes were void of any emotion. It's standard for the family hosting the event, Claire. It's simply how it's done in our world. That was when the first real crack appeared in my love for Liam. I showed him the invitation, my hands shaking. Do you see this, Liam? Do you see what they're doing? He looked at it, then back at me, his face etched with a familiar discomfort. It's just tradition, Claire. No, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It's a message, and you're letting them send it. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought being reduced to an afterthought on my own wedding invitation was the bottom. But I was wrong. The Prestons had one more move to make, a final, devastating act of cruelty that would shatter everything. And in doing so, they would unwittingly hand me the very weapon I needed to burn their world to the ground. Part 2. The Erasing. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a special kind of hell. I was living in a state of suspended animation, watching a life that was supposed to be mine unfold behind a thick pane of glass. Beatrice, the wedding planner, would send emails to Liam and his mother, occasionally CCing me as if by accident. They detailed florists, not me of course, because my work was too rustic, cake tastings I wasn't invited to, and dress fittings for a bridal party I barely knew, composed entirely of the daughters of Eleanor's society friends. My own friends were furious on my behalf. My maid of honor, Sarah, was a firecracker who had disliked the Prestons on principle long before she'd even met them. "This is insane, Claire," she'd say over coffee, her hands clenched around her mug. "You have to put your foot down. This isn't a merger, it's a marriage." But I didn't know how. I felt utterly powerless. Every attempt to assert myself was framed as me being difficult, ungrateful, or, worst of all, unable to understand their ways. I tried talking to Liam again and again. Each conversation was a slow, painful dance of him defending them and me feeling more and more alone. "Claire, they're paying for everything," he argued one night, the strain showing on his face. "It's a massive expense. We should be grateful. This is their way of showing they care." I let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Care? Liam, they don't care. This is a transaction. It's a showcase for their status, and I'm just the plus one. Your mother looks at me like I'm something she scraped off her shoe. Is that caring?" He had no answer. He just ran his hands through his hair and stared at the floor, a man drowning in filial duty. His weakness was no longer just a flaw, it was a betrayal. His silence was a choice, a daily decision to side with them over me. The man I fell in love with, the one who saw me and cherished me, was disappearing, replaced by a hollowed-out version who only knew how to placate his parents. The breaking point, the moment that an invisible line was crossed from which there was no return, came during what was supposed to be my wedding dress appointment. Eleanor had insisted on it. "We have an account at Vera's," she'd said, naming the most exclusive and outrageously expensive bridal boutique in the city. "Beatrice will meet you there." I arrived feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe this, at least, could be my moment. A wedding dress is personal, sacred. Surely, they couldn't co-opt this. I walked into the boutique, a hushed temple of silk and tulle. Eleanor, Beatrice, and two of Liam's cousins were already there, sipping champagne. I was not offered any. "Ah, Claire, you're here," Eleanor said, looking at her watch. "Let's try to be efficient." For an hour, I was treated like a mannequin. Gowns were pulled without my input. Beatrice would hold them up against me, and Eleanor would dismiss them with a wave of her hand. Too much lace, it looks cheap. The silhouette does nothing for her figure. That neckline is rather common. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there. My body, my taste, my feelings were irrelevant. Finally, a consultant, a kind-faced woman who seemed to pity me, brought out a dress I had eyed when I first walked in. It was simple, elegant, and timeless. When I put it on, for the first time all day, I felt a spark of myself. I walked out of the dressing room, a tentative smile on my face. Eleanor's eyes scanned me from head to toe. There was a long, excruciating silence. Then she turned to Beatrice and said, in a voice loud enough for the entire boutique to hear, "It will have to do. We can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, after all." The air was sucked from my lungs. The consultant gasped softly. Liam's cousins suddenly found the pattern on the carpet intensely interesting. In that moment, in a room full of mirrors, I had never felt so ugly or so small. The insult was so precise, so publicly delivered, it was designed for maximum humiliation. I stood there, frozen, the beautiful dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a fool. I waited for someone, anyone, to defend me. But there was only silence. I looked at my reflection, and I didn't recognize the pale, defeated woman staring back. I turned, walked back into the dressing room, took off the dress, put on my own clothes, and left the boutique without saying a single word. The silence that followed me out was more damning than any shout. I called Liam, my voice cracking, and told him what had happened. His reaction was the final cut. He sighed. A deep, weary sigh. "Oh, Claire. You know Mom has no filter. She probably didn't mean it like that. You can be so sensitive." Sensitive. The word hit me like a slap. I wasn't sensitive. I was being systematically dismantled, and the man who was supposed to be my partner was handing my bullies the tools. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, the feel of that expensive dress still on my skin, the echo of Eleanor's words in my ears. The pain was so profound it was physical. It felt like my ribs were tightening around my heart, squeezing the life out of it. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about my worth as a person. They were telling me, in every way they could, that I had none. I decided I had to make one last stand. Not for the wedding, but for myself. The next afternoon, I drove to the Preston mansion. I needed to look them in the eye. I needed to hear it from Liam, with his parents present. I needed to know, once and for all, where I stood. I found the three of them in the formal living room, the same cold room where I'd first met them. They were looking at seating charts. My arrival was an unwelcome interruption. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking but firm. Liam stood up, looking anxious. "Claire, maybe now isn't a good time." "No," I cut him off. "It's the perfect time." I turned to Eleanor and Richard. "I know you don't approve of me. I know you don't want me in your family. But the way you have treated me, the constant insults, the humiliation, it has to stop. This is my wedding too." Richard Preston finally looked up from his papers. He took off his reading glasses and placed them carefully on the mahogany table. His eyes were cold and devoid of emotion. "You are mistaken, Claire," he said, his voice calm and level. It was the calmness that was so terrifying. "This is not your wedding. This is our son's wedding." Eleanor stood, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "What Richard means is, a wedding is a union of families. And it has become abundantly clear that a union with your family is not a suitable prospect for the Prestons." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Liam, my eyes pleading. "Say something. Please, say something." He stood there, pale and silent, a statue of a man. And then Eleanor delivered the final, fatal blow. She picked up a small, exquisitely engraved card from the table. It was an access card for the Greystone Ballroom. She held it out, not to me, but just held it in the air between us. "We have tried to be patient," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "We had hoped you would come to understand your position. Since you have not, let us be perfectly clear. This is a private celebration for our family and our guests. It is not a charity case. You are not welcome." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. "You are not welcome. At my own wedding." I stared at her, then at Richard, then finally at Liam. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his shoes, the picture of pathetic cowardice. His silence was his answer. His silence was his consent. He was letting them do this. He was letting them erase me. The shock was so immense, it was like being plunged into ice water. There was no rage, no tears, just a profound, hollow emptiness. I felt my entire world, the future I had so carefully built in my mind with this man, crumble to dust at my feet. I looked at the three of them, a united front of wealth, arrogance, and cruelty. I saw them for what they were. And I saw Liam for what he was, a spineless extension of their will. I turned without another word. As I walked out of that house, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me, the numbness began to recede. And in its place, something new began to grow. It started as a tiny, hot spark in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't despair. It was something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. It was resolve. Driving away from that stone mausoleum, the tears finally came, hot and furious. But they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were tears of rage. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to have a wedding without me. Fine. Let them. But they had made one catastrophic mistake. They had underestimated me. They thought they were breaking a delicate little flower. They had no idea they were unleashing a storm. And as I drove, a new plan began to form, a plan so audacious, so bold, it made me gasp. They would have their celebration, but I would have my own. And we would see whose family, whose community, whose celebration truly mattered. Part 3. The Blueprint of a Uprising. The 24 hours after leaving the Preston mansion were a blur of incandescent rage and chilling clarity. The humiliation from the dress shop, the brutal finality of Eleanor's words, Liam's gutless silence, it all swirled into a perfect storm inside me. I didn't just want to move on. I wanted to make a statement. I wanted them to feel, just for a moment, the same public insignificance they had worked so hard to inflict on me. The idea that had sparked on the drive home began to take shape. It wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about reclamation. They had stolen my wedding, so I was going to steal it back. Not by fighting them for their sterile, joyless event, but by creating something that was the absolute antithesis of it. On the exact same day, at the exact same time. My first call was to Sarah. I found her at my little apartment, sitting amidst the wreckage of my shattered dreams, a wedding magazine open on the table, a swatch of fabric for bridesmaids' dresses I would never use. I told her everything, the words pouring out of me in a torrent. When I finished, her eyes were blazing. She didn't offer pity. She offered fury, which was exactly what I needed. "Good," she said, her voice a low growl. "Let's burn them to the ground." That night, my apartment transformed into a war room. Fueled by coffee, pizza, and righteous anger, we laid out the plan. It was audacious, possibly insane. We had less than 4 weeks until the date. The Prestons had a year and a team of professionals. We had my small savings, Sarah's ruthless organizational skills, and a network of friends who I hoped would rally to my side. "Okay, first things first, venue," Sarah said, tapping a pen on a notepad. "Greystone Ballroom is downtown, stuffy, no soul. We need the opposite." I knew the place instantly. It was a renovated barn on the outskirts of town called the Willow Creek Hall. It was rustic, warm, with exposed wooden beams, a huge stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a wildflower meadow. It was everything I had originally dreamed of. It was everything the Prestons would hate. I'd done a few floral arrangements for weddings there, and the owner, a warm, no-nonsense woman named Martha, had always been kind to me. I called her the next morning, my heart pounding. I explained the situation, feeling a bit foolish laying out my grand, dramatic plan. But Martha didn't laugh. "The Prestons," she said, a distinct lack of admiration in her voice. "I've heard stories. Honey, that's the most rock and roll thing I've ever heard. The date is yours. And don't you worry about the deposit right now. We'll work it out. Consider it a contribution to the cause." I hung up the phone, stunned. It was the first sign that this might actually work. The first brick in my new foundation. Next, the invitations. This was the masterstroke. This was the declaration of war. I couldn't just invite my friends and family. To make the statement I needed to make, I had to invite everyone. The entire, combined guest list. Getting it was easier than I expected. Beatrice, the Ice Queen planner, had, in a rare moment of carelessness, included me on a master spreadsheet with names and addresses weeks ago. I had saved it to my hard drive, thinking I might use it to send my own thank you notes. Now it was my weapon. I designed the invitations myself that weekend. No gold foil, no stuffy calligraphy. I used thick, recycled cardstock and a simple, elegant font. At the top, in beautiful script, it said, "A celebration of love, friendship, and new beginnings." The wording inside was carefully crafted. It was honest, but with a lethal edge of grace. "You are joyfully invited to celebrate with Claire Miller as she begins a new chapter. On Saturday, October 25th, she will be hosting a celebration to honor the friends and family who have supported her with true love and kindness. Please join her for an evening of food, dancing, and genuine happiness at the Willow Creek Hall. Your presence is the only gift she needs." No mention of a wedding. No mention of Liam. But the date, the same date as the Preston affair, was the key. It forced a choice. It wasn't an invitation. It was a referendum on decency. Sarah and I spent an entire Sunday in an assembly line of stuffing, sealing, and stamping over 300 invitations. With every envelope I sealed, I felt a piece of my power returning. I was no longer a victim in their story. I was the author of my own. The calls started trickling in a few days after the invitations went out. First, my family, confused but fiercely supportive. "Whatever you're doing, honey, we're there," my mom said, her voice thick with emotion. Then came the calls from mutual friends, hesitant and awkward. Claire? We got your invitation, and we also got one from the Prestons. Is everything okay?" I had rehearsed my answer. I delivered it with calm, unwavering confidence. "Liam and I are no longer together. His parents are proceeding with a celebration for him, and I am hosting my own event to celebrate my friends and family. There's no pressure at all. You should go where you feel most comfortable." The phrase, "go where you feel most comfortable," was my secret weapon. I was betting that for most decent people, comfortable meant a warm, joyful party with a wronged friend, not a cold, pretentious gala hosted by a family of tyrants. The biggest mini-conflict came from Liam's Aunt Carol. She was his mother's sister, but had always shown a spark of kindness. She called me, her voice flustered. "Claire, dear, what is going on? Eleanor is telling everyone you had some sort of breakdown and got confused." My blood boiled. Of course, that was their narrative. The hysterical, unstable little florist. "Carol, that's not what happened," I said, my voice steady. "Eleanor and Richard informed me that I was uninvited from the wedding, that it was a family celebration, and I was not welcome. Liam stood by and let them. So I decided to have my own celebration with people I consider my true family. You are, of course, Welcome at mine if you'd like to come. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. They uninvited you, she whispered, horrified. Oh, my dear girl. That is monstrous. In that moment, I knew I had an ally behind enemy lines. The planning was a whirlwind. My friends formed a small, dedicated army. Sarah handled logistics. Another friend who was a chef helped me design a menu of amazing, rustic comfort food, a stark contrast to the Preston's fussy, multi-course French menu. We found a lively folk rock band full of guys I knew from the local market. And the flowers were my therapy. I poured all my pain, my anger, and my hope into them. I ordered box after box of my absolute favorites: dahlias in deep burgundies, fragrant garden roses, trailing eucalyptus, and delicate cosmos. My little shop was overflowing. As I worked, arranging each stem, I felt like I was rebuilding my own life, piece by beautiful piece. Then, the inevitable call came. Liam. His name flashed on my screen, and my stomach twisted into a knot of old pain and new strength. I let it ring 4 times, took a deep breath, and answered. What do you want, Liam? I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth. Claire, what the hell is this? My mother is furious. Everyone is calling, asking about 2 parties. You're trying to humiliate me, to humiliate my family. I almost laughed. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. Humiliate you? You stood in your parents' living room and silently watched as they told me I wasn't welcome at my own wedding. You let them treat me like garbage for a year. You let your mother call me a sow's ear. You don't get to talk to me about humiliation. This has nothing to do with you anymore. This is about me and the people who actually care about me. You're being crazy, Claire. We can fix this. Just call it off. Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding, he pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. He wasn't sorry. He was scared of the social fallout. And in that moment, the last vestiges of my love for him died. It wasn't a dramatic, painful death. It was a quiet, simple realization, like a light bulb finally burning out. He was a child. A weak, frightened child, terrified of his mother. There's nothing to fix, Liam, I said, and my voice was calm, serene. I'm not calling anything off. I suggest you go and enjoy your party. I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. And his parents. And Beatrice's. I severed the connection. The past was the past. The night before the dueling events, my apartment was filled with my closest friends, all of them helping to load boxes of decorations into a van. The Willow Creek Hall was already partially decorated, the strings of fairy lights we'd hung twinkling like captured stars. My dress, not a wedding dress, but a beautiful flowing ivory gown I'd bought at a small boutique, was hanging on my bedroom door. Everything was ready. But as my friends left and silence descended on my small apartment, a wave of cold fear washed over me. What if I was wrong? What if all my bravado was for nothing? What if people chose loyalty, or tradition, or fear of the Prestons over me? What if I spent the night standing in a beautifully decorated empty hall, the ultimate punchline to my own tragic joke? The question hung heavy in the air, a terrifying cliffhanger on the eve of my revolution. Tomorrow I would have my answer. Part 4. The sound of silence and the roar of a celebration. The morning of October 25th dawned crisp and clear, the autumn sun casting a golden, forgiving light over everything. I woke up not with a nervous flutter of a bride, but with the steely calm of a general on the morning of a decisive battle. The fear from the night before had settled into a quiet resolve. Whatever happened today, I had done this for me. I had refused to be erased. My friends Sarah and Maya arrived early with coffee and pastries, and the morning unfolded in a haze of laughter and nervous energy. There was no talk of the Prestons, no mention of Liam. We talked about old memories, inside jokes, and the future. As we did my hair and makeup, it felt less like preparing for a wedding and more like gearing up for a coronation. My coronation. We arrived at the Willow Creek Hall in the early afternoon. It was even more beautiful than I had imagined. My floral arrangements were everywhere, bursting with life and color from every corner. The wooden beams were wrapped in twinkling lights, the tables were set with simple, elegant place settings, and the great stone fireplace was roaring, casting a warm, inviting glow over the entire room. It was a space that felt alive, a space that breathed warmth and welcome. It was the physical manifestation of everything I stood on. The event was set to begin at 6 p.m., the same time as the Prestons' affair. As the clock ticked past 5:30, the familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The band was warming up, the catering staff was ready, the candles were lit. Everything was perfect, except for one thing: the cavernous, echoing emptiness of the hall. At 5:45, I was standing by one of the large windows overlooking the long, winding driveway, smoothing down the front of my ivory dress for the 100th time. Sarah came and stood beside me, sensing my fear. "They'll come, Claire," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "What if they don't?" I breathed, the question that had haunted me for weeks. What if it's just us? "Then we'll have the best damn party for 10 people this place has ever seen," she said fiercely. 6 p.m. came and went. Silence. The long driveway remained empty. 6:05. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. I could picture it perfectly, the Greystone ballroom across town filling up, the clinking of champagne glasses, the polite society laughter, while I stood here in my monument to a failed rebellion. 6:10. My hope was beginning to curdle into a sick, sinking feeling of humiliation. Maybe Liam's aunt was wrong. Maybe their power, their influence, was too much to overcome. Maybe people talked a big game about justice, but when it came down to it, they'd always choose the safety of the status quo. And then I saw it. A single pair of headlights, cutting through the twilight as it turned off the main road and onto our driveway. "Someone's here," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. It was my parents, their faces beaming with pride as they got out of the car. My mom rushed to hug me, her eyes wet with tears. "Oh, Claire, you look so beautiful. Everything looks beautiful." They were the first drop in what was about to become a deluge. A few minutes later, another car. And then 2 more. Then a steady stream. Cars, headlights like a procession of fireflies, were turning off the main road and heading towards us. Not towards the city. Not towards the Greystone ballroom. Towards me. My aunts, uncles, cousins. My friends from college, from my yoga class, from the flower market. But then I started seeing other faces. Mutual friends of Liam and mine, looking relieved and happy to be there. And then, the real shock, people from Liam's side. Distant cousins I'd met once or twice. Colleagues of his from the firm. And then his Aunt Carol arrived, pulling me into a fierce hug and whispering, "I wouldn't have missed this for the world." By 7 p.m., the Willow Creek Hall was packed. It was overflowing with people, with chatter, with laughter. The room wasn't just full. It was vibrant, alive with an energy that was pure joy. People were hugging me, telling me how brave I was, how beautiful the hall looked, how happy they were to be there. No one mentioned the other party. They didn't need to. Their presence here said everything. The climax came around 7:30. One of Liam's cousins, a younger woman named Chloe whom I'd always liked, arrived late, looking flushed and stressed. She beelined straight for me. "Claire, oh my God," she said, her eyes wide. "You will not believe it." "What? What's going on?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "I went there first," she said, meaning the Greystone. "My mom made me, just to show face. Claire, it's a morgue. It's a ghost town." I held my breath. "I'm not kidding," she continued, speaking in a rushed whisper. "There are maybe 50 people in a ballroom that holds 400. It's all just Richard's oldest business partners and Eleanor's bridge club. The caterers are standing around with trays of food and no one to serve them to. The band is playing to an empty dance floor. It's the most awkward, depressing thing I've ever seen. She leaned in closer. And Eleanor, oh, you should see her face. It looks like she swallowed a wasp. She keeps smiling this horrible, tight smile, pretending she's having a wonderful time. Richard is pacing by the bar, talking furiously on his phone. And Liam, she trailed off, shaking her head. He just looks lost. Like a little boy in a suit that's too big for him. It's honestly pathetic. A slow, brilliant smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of malice. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated vindication. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply built something better, and their world had crumbled under the weight of its own emptiness. Their power was an illusion, built on obligation and fear, and the moment people were given a choice, a real choice, they ran towards warmth and authenticity. Later that evening, I stood on the small stage with the band, a glass of champagne in my hand. The music stopped, and all eyes turned to me. "Hi, everyone," I said, my voice clear and steady over the microphone. I don't have a long speech prepared. I just want to look around this room and try to memorize this moment. A few weeks ago, I felt very lost. I was made to feel small and voiceless, and not good enough. But tonight, standing here, surrounded by all of you, I have never felt stronger or luckier. My eyes scanned the crowd, the faces of the people who had chosen me. This isn't a wedding, but it is a celebration of love. The love of friends who become your family. The love of family who stand by you no matter what. And the love you have to find for yourself, to stand up and say, I am enough. So thank you. Thank you for choosing love, for choosing joy, and for choosing to be here with me. Now let's dance. The room erupted in cheers. The band launched into an upbeat, infectious song, and the dance floor was immediately flooded. I danced with my father. I danced with Sarah. I danced with dozens of friends. I danced until my feet ached and my face hurt from smiling. All night, I heard snippets of the fallout from across town. Text messages were flying. People who had gone to the Prestons out of obligation were hearing about the real party and were literally sneaking out to come to mine. By the end of the night, the story was already solidifying into local legend. The tale of the two weddings, and how an entire community turned its back on the cold arrogance of the Prestons and chose kindness instead. The Prestons' grand affair ended early. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for them. In their world, image is everything, and they had suffered the ultimate public humiliation. They weren't just insulted, they were rendered irrelevant. They were exposed as having a kingdom with no subjects. I heard through the grapevine that Richard lost a major business deal because of the optics, and Eleanor became a social pariah overnight. They had hosted a party to showcase their power and ended up revealing they had none at all. I never heard from Liam again. There was nothing left to say. I moved on, and my life became fuller and brighter than I ever could have imagined had I married into that gilded cage. My business flourished, propelled by the story that everyone in town now knew. People wanted to support the florist who had stood up for herself. My victory wasn't in their defeat. My victory was in this room, in the laughter, the music, the palpable joy. It was the profound realization that I didn't need their name, their money, or their approval. I had my own community. I had my own strength. I had built my own family from the ground up, based not on bloodlines or bank accounts, but on genuine love and mutual respect. And standing there, in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by the life I had reclaimed, I knew this was the sweetest victory of all. I hadn't just gotten revenge. I had gotten my life back. What the Prestons never understood is that real power isn't about control or status. It's about connection. It's about building a community that will stand with you when it matters. If you've ever had to build your own family or fight for your own worth, let me know in the comments below. Your stories matter. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and sweet, sweet revenge. Thank you for listening.